Welcome to Land of the Bible. I'm your host, David Sussman. Today, we travel along one of the most remarkable trade networks of the ancient world, the Spice Route. The Negev Desert. It may look empty at first glance, but centuries ago, these sands were alive with movements of traders. Camels laden with precious goods like frankincense, myrrh, spices, and textiles, traveling from Arabia to the Mediterranean. The network of desert roads connected distant lands, brought wealth and power, and shaped the lives of communities who called the desert home. At the heart of this network were the Nabateans, a people of vision, ingenuity, and strategy. They were desert dwellers, but not simply survivors. They were masters of commerce, engineers of water systems, and builders of cities carved from stone. Their influence stretched from Arabia to the Mediterranean, and their legacy still stands in towns like Petra, Mamshit, and Avdat. The Spice Route was more than a road. It was a lifeline of ideas, goods, and cultures, and the Nabateans were its masters, shaping the desert, shaping trade, and shaping history. In this episode, we will follow the trails of the Nabateans, exploring their cities, their ingenuity, and their culture. We'll uncover how a people of the desert became rulers of one of the most ancient world's most important trade networks, and left a legacy that still stands in stone and spirit today. So let's head into the Negev Desert of Israel and the Spice Route. So the Nabateans arrive here in the Negev roughly around the 3rd century BCE, and they immediately begin to construct way stations, oases, places where those that are traveling across the desert with all of their goods could rest for a little while, recoup, and continue on their journey. And Mamshit was one of those first places, one of the jewels of the Spice Route, really. And it stood here for literally centuries upon centuries upon centuries through the Roman period, later on during the Byzantine period. And as the Spice Route started to decline, as new trade routes came in, simultaneously, the Muslim Arab conquerors here in the land of Israel, roughly the year 638 CE, would colonize the land of Israel. And as a result, Mamshit is destroyed. It's never rebuilt, and the Nabateans, who will assimilate into this new Arab Muslim tribe, will disappear from the face of history. Mamshit was primarily a way station, a place that caravans would stop in order to get a little bit of R&R. However, it was also a small town with roughly about 1,000 residents living here. And the residents who lived here were extremely wealthy. Archaeologists have discovered a number of villas here where the residents lived that are big even in today's standards. Walking through this magnificent villa, you can see the 3 arches that are above me that supported another floor, the second story to this villa. In the northern section of this villa, we have this really remarkably large room. We have 3 pillars here on the western side. We have another 3 pillars on the eastern side. And we're really not too sure what this room was used for, but it had to be important. Because as we're walking through this second door, there's actually a system here in which somebody could put a metal or wooden slat in order to lock the door, protecting whoever's on the other side. Another interesting aspect about this room is there's also a water system here. You can see like an aqueduct that water used to flow through. So let's now head out and follow the water source. And we can see here in the main hallway of the villa that leads to all the various rooms, the aqueduct runs along the entire length. As the centuries went by, the Nabateans became less nomadic and more stationary. Sure, they still controlled the spice route and roamed around the desert bringing the goods from the Arabian Peninsula to the Mediterranean. However, not everybody who lived here in Mamshit were traders or the family of traders, and they had to think of ways to make money. So in addition to having what's called a khan in Arabic, or what we would call a bed and breakfast today, there was also a marketplace so that the people who were traveling could pick up food and other textiles and goods that they might need during their travels. And this is one of the beautiful marketplaces that existed here in Mamshit. Since the Nabateans were a nomadic people, they learned how to master the desert really like no one else. They were able to figure out how to take the flash floods and to divert them into large cisterns to collect water. And here in the desert, you have very little of it. So if you can't contain the water during the winter times, you're not gonna have any water in the summer times. And since they were able to trap that water, they were able to theoretically tame the desert in a way that nobody else could. And as a result, they were the only ones that could take the riches of the Arabian Peninsula, bring them to the area of Ashdod and Ashkelon or Gaza, and ship it out west to the rest of Europe, who highly sought after certain types of sap from trees called frankincense and myrrh. I'm sure you've heard of those spices, right? These are the incense that was used in palaces, kingdoms, and pagan temples, and later on in Christian churches around the world. But what did they do on their return trip? Well, they would take wine, pottery, and all sorts of amazing goods that were produced in Europe and other parts and bring them to the wealthy people in the Arabian Peninsula. This made the Nabateans incredibly wealthy, and with wealth brought power. And the Nabatean kingdom, with its capital in Petra, stood for almost 1,000 years. Well, maybe. In the year 106 CE, the Romans, led by their emperor Trajan, will annex this area of the Nabateans. And the Nabateans slowly will become Roman, and just as the Romans became Christian, the Nabateans will eventually become Christian as well.
Imagine walking where Jesus walked, where faith comes to life. Feel the Bible story unfold around you, from the green Galilee to Jerusalem's ancient streets. Experience the serene and welcoming land of the Bible, where miracles happen. Put your heart where His footsteps are. Visit Israel.
Welcome to our second stop here today as we explore the Nabatean spice route in the Negev desert. As we walk into the main entrance here of the city of Shifta, twice as big as Mamshit, it's estimated that there was roughly 2,000 people who lived here. Again, no natural source of water. So how did they survive? Well, we talked a little bit about where the income came from, and the wealth of these cities when we're in Mamshit. What I want to do here in Shifta is to focus a little bit on how they gathered the water to survive those dry, arid summers, and how they use that water to cultivate not just grain and simple produce, but also olives, grapes, dates. So come join me as we explore the ancient city of Shifta. So it might look that I'm walking through just a pile of rocks here. But what we have here is actually the residential area, or one of the residential areas of Shifta. And there are some of the homes here that have survived, that are in better condition than what we can see here. Some of them have been reconstructed so that we get a better idea of what they look like. But the reason why I'm highlighting this here is that one of the easiest ways to capture water during the rainy season, which is only a short period of time throughout the year, and even during those times it rains very infrequently. But what they would do is build a system of gutters, right, like we have in our homes in the West, and they would channel every drop of water from the roofs, from the streets, from every area here in Shifta, and drive them towards these man-made caves, if you will, called a cistern, digging into the rock. But it wasn't just as simple as digging into the rock. They also needed to plaster, to waterproof the limestone. All the stone here is very, very porous. They need to waterproof it. They would do that with plaster in order to save that water. Every single drop was so important in order to make sure that they had water during those rainy months. On a side note, the Nabateans were also well known for their incredible pottery. The fact that they were able to make it so thin, so light, but at the same time, so strong. And walking through all of this ancient ruins over here, you can literally find hundreds of pieces of pottery, just like the one that I found right here by my feet. And you can see how thin it is, how light it is, and not easy to break. This was very valuable in the ancient world. It's absolutely amazing here, walking through these ruins, but seeing that exceptional building over there, noticing that there's a large apse. I have to assume that this is from the Byzantine period, and this was one of the churches that they built after converting to Christianity. Come, let's head on over. Walking through these beautiful villas and homes here in Shifta is good enough. Unfortunately for us though, the roofs did not survive. So we can't see those gutters and the system that they built in order to collect the rainwater. But we can see the end result over here. Roof up above, gutters trapping the rainwater coming through these tubes literally carved out of stone, filling up a cistern. And if you come over here, you can actually look down and see the cistern within this beautiful villa or public complex for people to drink water from. So we saw that system inside the villa in somebody's personal home, how they collected the water from the gutters on the roof of their homes. But what about in the town square, in the public square in front of the church? Here we can see not one, but two aqueducts collecting water, not from the roofs, but from the streets that ran throughout Shifta. And all of these aqueducts here continue traveling to the north and around. And if you'll notice, it curves to the right over here and flows into this massive pool here. And this reservoir served the public community at large. So somebody ran out of water in their home or they're traveling through the street, they can come here and collect water. And potentially, I'm sure it was even open for people at certain times to actually bathe in. And you can see stairs that go all the way down to the bottom here. This is a massive reservoir here that served the 2,000 inhabitants who lived here in Shifta. Walking out of the northern section of the city, we begin to see the agricultural landscape here in Shifta. out in the distance, you can actually see some of the terraces in which they would trap the soil, plant the vineyards, the produce, the olives, whatever it was that they were growing here in Shifta, that they didn't only use to supply the city with its own food, but actually sold it to those that were traversing the desert. And one of the ways that they gather the waters, if you look out there, you can actually see there's a line of greenery. That's called a nachal, a dried riverbed. But in the wintertime, when it rains and the flash floods come through, that turns into a raging river, albeit only for 10, 15 minutes. So what the Nabateans would do was to build aqueducts and dams. A dam would stop the flow of water, push it to the side, in which it would fill up those aqueducts, and massive cisterns, ones that were too big to actually have in the city. And this would be the emergency supply, and from there they could build aqueducts to irrigate all the terraces. And of course, 2,000-person population needed a lot of food, they need a lot of water, and this is the way they did it. Yalla, let's continue as we head to another Nabatean city here on the Spice Route known as Avdat. As we've mentioned, there's not a lot of living sources of water here in the Negev desert. However, one major source of living water, a spring that's located right here in the Negev, is Ein Avdat. Ein Avdat is located in the biblical area known as Wadi Tzin. It's one of the major riverbeds that takes the flash floods and sends it towards the Arava Valley. However, Ein Avdat is a natural spring that supplies water to this area all year round. And that's why here, towards the end of the dry season, you still see a lot of greenery all around. The Nabateans would come here and use the water not only for drinking, but they would set up an elaborate system of aqueducts as well as terraces to stop the soil from coming down the sides of the canyon, where they would grow grapes, olives, dates, wheat, barley, and this was one of the main bread baskets of the Nabateans. In addition to the agriculture that was produced here, this was a popular place as a rest area for those traveling along the spice route for obvious reasons. Later on, during the Byzantine period, monastic monks lived in the caves that dot the cliffs over here. Today, in the modern age, in the state of Israel, it's been turned into a national park, and many youth groups and tourists will come here in order to spend a leisurely afternoon hiking the beautiful canyon and enjoying some of the most magnificent views that are offered here in the desert of Israel. While there are many more cities on the spice route here in Israel, Avdat is going to be our last stop today. Originally constructed in the early part of the 3rd century BCE. It grew to a few hundred people by the 1st century BCE, but reached its peak during the Byzantine period where we had over 3,000 people living here full time, cultivating the land through channeling water from cisterns and aqueducts to irrigate the fields on the slopes down below. Let's now check out one of the wine presses here, which was a lucrative business producing wine during the Byzantine period. During the late Roman period, the Romans built new trade routes and the spice route became less necessary. So the Nabateans who were living here had to find a new source of income, and producing wine became wildly popular, especially during the Byzantine period. Avdat produced more wine than all the other cities along the spice route. It probably has something to do with Ain Avdat just down the road here, which gave a constant supply of fresh water where many of the vineyards existed. However, it was here that they would press the grapes, literally on this threshing floor right here. They would bring the grapes, stomp on them with their own feet. All of that grape juice would flow through this opening here onto the second floor where it would pour into a vat, and that's where it would be collected for fermentation.
I will bless those who bless you, God promised Abraham. Embrace this covenant by connecting with the people of Israel. From Jerusalem's stones to Galilee's shores, experience living faith through their traditions and hospitality. Your journey is more than visiting biblical sites. It's about hearts that welcome your friendship. Your presence matters. Discover Israel.
One thing that we haven't talked about yet is the Nabatean religion. Originally in early Nabatea, they were pagans. They worshipped all sorts of different gods. They had a massive pantheon, holding on to many of the myths that began in the Arabian Peninsula where they came from. They didn't worship figurines. They had these boxes, these stone blocks that they thought represented their gods. One of them, Deshara, their main god. Another one, Al-Uzza, who is the god of fertility and protection. However, later on, when the Romans would annex Nabatea in the year 106 by the Emperor Trajan, they would adopt many of the pagan customs of the Romans. So Deshara became Jupiter, and Al-Uzza became Aphrodite. However, during the Byzantine period, the Nabateans would slowly adopt Christianity. Even though it would take a century or two, the Nabateans as a whole became Christians, and their temples, like the one I'm standing in now, would be converted into churches with beautiful marble Byzantine-style baptismal fonts. During the Byzantine period, as Christianity swept through the Nabatean Empire, conversion became a big part of who they were. And so when people would traverse the desert and come to their cities as an oasis, as a place to recoup, one of the things the Nabateans would try and do would be to convert them. And we can see a baptismal pool here that people could enter, a heathen or a pagan, and come up the other side as a Christian. In addition to the temples being converted into the churches like the one I'm in right now, also the language changed during this period. It went from an Aramaic, a Nabatean-style Aramaic, to Greek. However, the Byzantine period would only last roughly about 300 years, and the Islamic invaders would arrive here in the Holy Land. The Nabateans, like many of the people living here, with the exception of the Jews, would convert to Islam and basically fizzle out into the sand and wind of history. Next week on Land of the Bible.
My name is Reverend Peter Fast, and we are going to take you on a journey in Nazareth about Jesus of Nazareth 2,000 years ago.
Thank you for tuning in today on Land of the Bible as we unraveled the mysteries of the Nabateans and the spice route, from Mumshit to Shifta, Avdat, the city of Dot, and so much more. We hope you'll join us next time as we connect you to the people, places, and land of the Bible.